While a lot of underground music genres got their fleeting moments in the spotlight in the 90s, slowcore was not one of them. It was non-existent in the mainstream landscape. Even the biggest slowcore bands of the period, such as Low, Codeine, and Red House Painters, felt commercially invisible. Loud, energetic guitar music was the toast of the decade after all, so it only made sense that the agonizingly slow, heavily stripped down, and depressingly miserable sounds the nascent scene was producing attracted a very niche, very limited crowd. As such, slowcore languished in obscurity for much of the decade and the next. Sure, it had its core audience that helped keep it alive, but for the longest time, it just wasn't the kind of music you made if you wanted to attract a bigger fan base. That all changed from the mid-2010s onwards. Slowcore has become a staple in many streaming playlists. Albums that struggled to sell in the 90s are suddenly being reissued for an entirely new generation of indie fans. Long-defunct bands that pioneered the sound from the 90s, nearly all of whom hate the term slowcore, are doing sold-out reunion shows. These are the bands that engineered the dragging, plodding, and miserable sounds of slowcore in the 90s. Codeine. When Codeine first emerged out of the New York scene in 1989, people had no idea what lane they were supposed to fit in. They played guitar music with extremely slow tempos that you were expecting the song to fall apart at any point. Instead, they will hit you with a big, distorted freak-out mid-song that makes them sound like a typical 90s alt-rock band before once again hushing and slowing things down to an uncomfortable crawl. They crafted songs highlighted by sparse arrangements and a lot of empty space between the notes, with the occasional distorted wall of sound going up and promptly going back down instead of staying on through the end. They initially released their debut, Frigid Stars LP, on German label Glitterhouse in 1990, before being picked up by Sub Pop the succeeding year. That same year, Sub Pop would become synonymous with the Seattle scene due to Nirvana's sudden burst into the mainstream, putting a big spotlight on all the bands in the indie label's roster. Granted, Codeine didn't exactly make the sludge-heavy guitar music that suddenly went in vogue, so they weren't part of the bands that really benefited from all that newfound interest. However, being at Sub Pop still gave them more exposure than most other bands playing their brand of slow, melancholic music, which is why many people still remember them from the period, even when they couldn't name a single song. They would work on a new album in 1992, which they wouldn't finish, instead putting out an EP that same year called Barely Real. 2 years later, they would have a new album called The White Birch, which is held in high esteem as a slowcore essential nowadays, with some critics describing it to be so agonizing it can drain an entire room of its energy in one playthrough. The band would break up shortly after that, with the members going on to different projects. They will, however, find a new lease on life in the 2010s, first reuniting for the reissue of their discography in 2012 under the Numero Group. 10 years later, they will finally release that unfinished 1992 album as Dessau, which would prompt the band to reunite for a multi-stop reunion tour that happened from 2023 to 2024. Low. Formed in 1993 by a husband and wife duo, along with different bass players throughout the years, this band started out as a curious experiment to see how their local Duluth, Minnesota crowd will respond to a band playing very quiet music at a time when grunge and similar post-punk sounds were very much the norm. Given how the band became active for nearly 30 years, guess those early shows didn't go so bad. After sending out their early demos, the band was signed to major label imprint Vernon Yard, thanks largely to an endorsement from producer Mark Kramer, who would record their first two albums, 1994's I Could Live in Hope and 1995's Long Division. They firmly established their minimalist and restrained sound with these early releases, characterized by clean guitar tones, a sparse drum kit, and unreleased tension, creating a sound that feels almost hypnotic. This style will be further refined through two more albums in the 90s, The Curtain Hits the Cast from 1996 and Secret Name from 1999. The band will continue on well through the 2000s, albeit with an ever-evolving sound that focused less on minimalism while still staying true to their slowcore roots. The band will end its run in 2022 after Mimi Parker passed away from ovarian cancer, leaving behind 13 albums of uncompromising slow music. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more 90s music discussions. We're making more of these, so hit that subscribe button if you want to join us for more. Red House Painters. This Bay Area band made music that's painfully snail-paced, intimate, and raw. Pairing it with confessional lyrics that dealt with grounded subjects most listeners can relate to. Formed in San Francisco in 1989, the band would end up being signed to iconic British label 4AD after head honcho Evo Watts-Russell heard their 6-song demo. According to stories, he loved the tape so much that the label mastered and released the demo with no changes as their debut album, 1992's Down Colorful Hill. The next year would see them release a massive 75-minute, self-titled double album that many point to as their magnum opus. The album would see the band dip their toes in different genres, including shoegaze, dream pop, and folk. But the work will be held together by the frigid pace and emotionally crushing sentiments across the tracks. They would follow it up shortly in the same year with a second self-titled release that put together recordings from the same sessions that didn't quite make the cut. Their last album for 4AD is 1995's Ocean Beach, which evolves their sound to something more acoustic and folk-oriented. They will sign to Island Records subsidiary Supreme after that, releasing Songs for a Blue Guitar in 1996. The album will mark another pivot, with the band incorporating classic rock and Americana influences, even putting in extended guitar solos like more traditional rock bands. They were supposed to release another album with Supreme, which will be shelved due to major label mergers. The band will break up shortly after. Sub Pop will eventually release that record in 2001 after buying the rights, but the band will already be inactive by then. Duster. Duster had a rather uneventful and short-lived career in the 90s, but somehow found a new lease on life in the last 8 years, even going on to have some of the most popular songs on TikTok in the 2020s. The trio formed in 1996, settling into a sound characterized by lo-fi production, sluggish tempos, and droning guitars that found a very small, very niche audience at the time. Their songs were bleak but somewhat comforting to put on, rather than being hard to listen to. Despite that, they would hardly make an impact in the music scene through their 2 full-length albums, 1998's Stratosphere and 2000's Contemporary Movement. In October of 2000, the head of their label, Up Records, will pass away, stalling the band's progress and leading to their breakup shortly later. While accounts vary, many seem to agree that it was around the mid-2010s when online music boards started buzzing about Duster's Stratosphere, which a new generation of indie rock fans were rediscovering for themselves and falling in love with. This will lead to the band's 2018 reunion, which will see them open for Alex G in Brooklyn for their first time on stage in 18 years. They will follow this up with 2 sold-out headlining shows, essentially announcing to the world that the band is back for real. The next year, the Numero Group will release Capsule Losing Contact, a comprehensive box set collecting the group's entire 90s discography. They won't stop there either. Since that time, they've released 4 new studio albums, a self-titled one in 2019, Together in 2022, In Dreams in 2024, and Crusher just last month. They've also hit the road hard, playing multiple festivals and international tours, essentially becoming a full-time band 2 decades after they initially went on hiatus. Bedhead. This 5-piece group was always a fascination to many critics and fans with the way they arranged their 3 interlocking clean guitar sounds, which managed to produce dense, almost hypnotic textures to accompany the plodding and dragging pace of their tracks. Formed in Texas, the the band will grind it out in the local scene before signing to Austin-based Trance Syndicate in 1993, which will release their debut album What Fun Life Was in 1994. It will receive widespread enthusiasm in the indie press, which hailed it as a fully formed debut that manages to incorporate its bleak atmosphere with subtle pop sensibilities. They will follow it up with 1996's Beheaded, which intensifies their deeply melancholic vision into a much more challenging listening experience. Their high point will come in 1998's Transaction De Novo, which will see the band at their heaviest, incorporating distortion, feedback, and tempo changes in a really impactful way compared to their previous work. The group will quietly disband in August of that year and never play as a group again, despite all the renewed interest for their music in recent years. Idaho. Originally formed by high school buddies Jeff Martin and John Barry in 1992, the band will be quickly signed to Caroline Records, which will release their full-length debut Year After Year the next year. The album will be a critical darling in the indie scene, with the band's feedback-heavy rumbling sound making a really strong impression on many critics. Barry, by the way, will leave shortly after that debut, leading the band to become an evolving vehicle for the multi-instrumentalist Martin. First, they will turn into a full band in the 1994 album This Way Out, which reprises more of the bleak and lethargic instrumentation from their debut. Their 1996 release, Three Sheets to the Wind, will be just a tad more eclectic, combining slowcore numbers with more up-tempo indie rock tracks. Their last 90s album, Alas, from 1998, slows things down once again, but shifts towards a more haunting, more psychedelic vibe. In the 2000s, the band will turn into a mostly solo project for Martin, who will create piano-heavy music that's intimate, hushed, and largely experimental until he decides to put it on hiatus in 2012. He will return to the project during the slowcore resurgence in the 2020s, even releasing a new album in 2024. Bluetile Lounge. Hailing from the isolated city of Perth, Australia, this band claims to have spent their first 2 years never playing a single show, instead obsessively using that time to perfect their sound. That sound will be a veritable exercise in extreme patience, as the band makes songs devoid of traditional structure that regularly go past the 8-minute mark, while moving at a punishingly glacial pace. Unlike more minimalist slowcore acts, they use distortion liberally, creating thick layers of sound that swell and recede to create their oppressive and isolating soundscapes. Their early break will come from Aussie indie label Chapter Music, which will include one of the band's songs on their Too Much Ash compilation in 1994. The next year, they will independently record a 5-song, 45-minute album called Lowercase that will find distribution under Summertime Records, a local indie. It made enough of a buzz that Sub Pop subsequently picked it up for US distribution, introducing the band to a wider audience. They followed it up with 1998's Half Cut, which will be released by Sonic Youth drummer Steve Shelley's Smells Like Records. For the next 20 years, that will be the last thing anyone will hear from the group. That will change in 2021, when the band announced they have reformed and started putting out new music again. They even returned to live performance last month, taking the stage at the Brunswick Ballroom in Melbourne. Theme. Originally formed in Chapel Hill in 1991, the band will consist of frontman/guitarist Soo-Young Park, bassist Lexi Mitchell, and Superchunk's Mac McCon on drums. They will release their debut the next year, Headsparks, on Homestead Records, which will establish their sound: slow, emotionally resonant melodies that will be punctuated by bursts of noisy and distorted guitars. The songs will alternate between the slower, more atmospheric tracks that Park seems to be going for, and more upbeat numbers that feel more in line with McCon's energetic drumming. Shortly after the debut, McCon will leave to focus on Superchunk, while the rest of the band will move to Chicago. There they will sign with Touch and Go, which will release their second full-length, 1993's The Problem With Me. This album will see them dive deeper into the slowcore sound fans and critics will remember, with many fans posthumously declaring it as the peak of Park's songwriting. Many critics will point to it later as the template that will influence emotional indie rock going forward. The band would see multiple lineup changes by the mid-90s, with Park being the only constant. As such, you can hear their sound evolve through the next two albums, 1995's Are You Driving Me Crazy and 1998's The Pace is Glacial. Neither will reach the bar that The Problem with Me set, but they remain highly respected releases from a band that's starting to comfortably settle into their sound. The band would close out their run in 2000 at a show in South Korea before quietly breaking up, only reuniting once to play Touch and Go Records' 25th anniversary party in 2006. The For Carnation. After stints in Slint, Squirrelbait, and Will Oldham's Palace Brothers, guitarist/vocalist Brian McMahon will go on to form the For Carnation, which will become his primary creative outlet through the rest of the decade. As with Slint, McMahon will use the band to write spoken word songs that often inspire feelings of dread or paranoia, albeit without the heavy climaxes, instead focusing on stripped-down and minimalist arrangements designed to build tension without release. They will release 2 EPs under Matador. There's the group's 1995 debut, Fight Songs, a dread-filled, acoustic-driven collection of deeply personal compositions, and 1996's Marshmallows, which expands their sonic arrangements with more complex compositions, industrial noises, and dissonant structures. Their lone full-length album will be a self-titled release in 2000, which will highlight a fully formed sound that incorporates synths, strings, and samples without losing the subtlety that gave their songs character. The band will disappear shortly after that album, only returning once to do the ATP Festival in the UK in 2009 before going back under. Acetone. Originally part of the garage rock outfit Spin Out, the members of Acetone formed the group in 1992 to play a quieter, more nuanced sound. Playing around the LA area, their slow and hazy compositions made a big enough impression to get the band quickly picked up by Virgin Records imprint Vernon Yard. That label will release both their self-titled debut EP and their debut album Cindy in 1993. Mainstream rock critics won't be too fond of the feedback-drenched, worn-down languor that permeates their music, although indie critics will be more positive about what they were trying to convey. They followed this up with 1995's I Guess I Would, which featured covers of country songs all redone in their slow, plodding, and whispered style. It was a critical darling that put the band on the radar of many indie fans. The next year, they will put out If You Only Knew, which many today consider their best album. For this one, they stripped much of their fuzz from their previous work, opting for a sound that conveys deeper intimacy and more intense melancholy. They will release 2 more albums, a self-titled one in 1997 and York Boulevard in 2000. Both will show a more polished sound that shows the band evolving. Like many slowcore bands from the 90s, they will be more revered in recent years, with many fans discovering them either from 2017's compilation album From Light in the Attic or the 2023 I'm Still Waiting box set that puts together all of the band's music in one place.